talk a lot of smack about nonfiction being the best genre, but actually I aspire to poetry, so I'm really honored to sneak in here among the poets. Just pretend like I'm a poet. I'm one of them, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read one piece, and it's a fragmented piece with many sections that indirectly speak to each other. And so if you feel a little lost, you're supposed to. It's called Hafu. The four of us were a family under one roof for less than 5 years. That was in Japan, in Shizuoka Prefecture. My parents ran an English language school out of our home in a small room off the carport. My Japanese father explained linguistic concepts in Japanese, and my American mother taught conversational English. The language was their work, but also the link between them. Their life plans, their day-to-day, and their fights, all in English. It was the language of the home they'd made together. For them to speak only English in the house was deliberate, but my brother and I preferred to speak Japanese. We teased our mother when she tried to do the same. She describes our thickly accented teasing as we laughed and said that her Japanese was very funny. Even then, the four of us weren't fully fused as a family, language and culture barriers always present. I search a family photo album for a picture with all of us together. I don't find one. When I ask my mother about a family picture, she can't remember there ever being one taken with the four of us together in one shot. When I was 4 and my brother was 6, my mother left my father. Their unlikely adventure of bringing two cultures together under one roof, their dreams of a family, all stayed in Japan. She took her children with her, brought us to the American South where she had grown up, where we were supposed to feel at home now. And one of us would grow up to choose our mother's country, the other our father's. As a child, when I asked my mother about being half, she said, "You're not, you're double." I watch a preview for Hafu, the mixed-race experience in Japan. It opens with dark Beethoven-esque piano, scenes of Japanese children on a playground. Then voices come in, native Japanese speakers with non-native faces, sharing their experiences of not fitting in, of not being accepted. The preview closes with shots of each key character, their names followed by designations of nationality. Australia times Japan, Venezuela times Japan, Korea times Japan, Mexico times Japan, Ghana times Japan. To get me, my parents multiplied Japan and America. A companion video shows Japan's changing demographics. More foreign nationals are moving to Japan and more Japanese are leaving. Am I counted among these numbers? One of the 1.1 million Japanese living abroad? I was born a Japanese national, only additionally American once my mother applied for my citizenship at the American consul in Tokyo 9 months after I was born. My U.S. passport lists Japan as my place of birth. As a child, I was devastated to find out I could never be America's president. As teenagers in America, my brother and I had to renew our Japanese passports before they expired. The Japanese consulate closest to our South Carolina home was in Atlanta, a 6-hour drive. I remember being excited as my mother drove us into that city of skyscrapers. I was wearing a pink sweater and a headband. The consulate was in a small portion of a clean marbled, air-conditioned building, and the beige carpet swallowed our laughter when we entered. The middle-aged Japanese women thought we were in the wrong place, spoke to us only in Japanese when they understood why we were there. I remember the drive home as quiet, ashamed, scolding myself for not knowing how to sign my name in Japanese, the disapproval and silence of those women, and how small I felt in their presence. Junketsu-shugi is a Japanese phrase translated as pure-bloodism. During World War II, German ideas of racial superiority spread in the land of the rising sun. Women related to those with leprosy or intellectual disability were sterilized. The Japanese government wanted a pure race of pure blood. Ainoko is a derogatory term used for people of mixed race, Japanese plus something other. It's often misunderstood as meaning love child, the I confused for the phonetically identical word for love. But I am not Ainoko. I am Ainoko, a child not of love, but of interval. In the 1970s, Hafu, from the English half, became a popular nomenclature for the same. In recent decades, to be hafu has become cool as hafu newscasters, models, and actors rise to stardom in Japan. I've met others who are hafu, become friends with them. They always more Japanese than me. Their Japanese mothers raised them to speak Nihongo. My case seems to be the exception, a Japanese father with a foreign wife. I have the Japanese last name they lack, dual citizenship, my name written in Japanese characters in the family registry, but I don't have the language, the customs. I try to speak to my hafu friends in Japanese, and they respond in English, an amused and slightly annoyed look on their faces. When I went to Hawaii to see my brother marry his Japanese bride, I walked the streets of Honolulu, an unfamiliar feeling of sameness and home in this place I'd never been. Other tourists asked me for directions. Locals smiled at me as they ignored the throngs of visitors, obviously white or obviously Japanese. I was neither and neither. When I returned to my job teaching in Tacoma, I began spending my free time looking at the websites of Hawaiian community colleges, daydreaming of sun and sand, and never being asked what I am. When I find out that my mother's ancestors were in the KKK, I am compelled, but not surprised. The older I get, or perhaps the more aware I become, I notice how often colored and oriental come out of my grandfather's mouth, the small comments. There goes a colored policeman. And then, after a pause, not the policeman can't be colored. I don't say anything. I want to be respectful, want to assume the best of my family. They grew up in a different time. There's not much diversity in the hills of Tennessee and West Virginia. And I think of having children and whether I could stay quiet if these comments were made in front of them. How do I point to a subtle bigotry and name it? Point to my grandfather and ask how he can be blind to the contradiction of loving me so much, his half-Oriental granddaughter. The KKK revelation comes in a West Virginia Ruby Tuesday at a gathering of my mother's family, the Wardens. Barbara leans over her chicken salad, her voice a murmur as she speaks to me below the din of our party of 6. I've seen the papers. Barbara is my mother's cousin, and I like her, her tiny frame and white hair, her soft voice, and the way she asks questions filled with mischief, which I didn't catch on to until I heard her do it again and again. There's a slight smile in her blue eyes, one of them permanently half closed, as she anticipates and receives my delighted reaction. Having roots in the rebellious Warden clan, we both love trouble, intrigue. Ooh, intrigue. Intriguing. I don't know, that's not as romantic. Okay. We both love trouble, intrigue, and secrets that can't be kept. Before this, in the larger table conversation, a horse story was shared, the Ku Klux Klan making its first appearance. My distant cousin tells of my great-grandfather's brother, Homer, and how he had a beautiful horse, his pride and joy. Homer's close friend asked a favor, could he borrow the horse for the weekend, and Homer agreed. He was generous. What he didn't know was that his friend would ride the borrowed horse into a KKK rally, the prize animal recognizable to everyone there. The rider, in full garb, was assumed to be Homer. This was the end of the story, and I clapped my hands and laughed along with the rest of the table because this was a funny Warden tale. The high stakes for Homer were not explored because the eruption of laughter marked the end of the story, a successful story. Because this is how Wardens are together, and I was one of them. During the lunch, my distant relatives, who I'd met for the first time that day, asked me about my father's side of the family. I answered their questions and shared that it wasn't until I was 15 that I came to understand that I don't look white. Another cousin, by then having decided that she liked me, quickly responded, "You do look white, I really think you do." It was a strange thing to say, and I could only understand it as kindness, welcome. I thanked her. As a younger adult, I bristled when people asked me what I was. I insisted to the world that I am white. But when people ask me what I am, they are not asking me to explain my culture. They are asking me to explain my face, my name. Sometimes I say that my father is Japanese and my mother is American, white American, I have to clarify further. At other times I say that even though my father's Japanese, I identify most with my mother's southern roots. As a new instructor at a Washington university, I receive an email invitation to a luncheon for faculty of color. I don't know what to do, and I ask my colleague Ryan, a Hafu with Japanese upbringing but a completely Western name, whether he had been invited. He had not. I answered the invitation. Please take me off this email list as I do not consider myself a person of color. I wish now that I had taken the time to explain that response, to make the suggestion that they allow faculty to self-identify as people of color rather than making assumptions based on appearances and names. My boyfriend, a white Michigan boy who grew up surrounded by cornfields, accuses me of being selectively Japanese. He's right. He tells me of a conversation he had, a friend of his asking what kind of music I like. She likes white girl music. When he tells me that he'd said this, I beam. You're so weird, he responds, shaking his head. Months later, I text him from a crowded West Virginia Wendy's. I'm the only non-white person here. He likes to sing to me in the tune of the Siamese Cat song in Lady and the Tramp. You are Japanese when you please. I laugh and continue the song. I ain't Japanese when I don't please.